Welcome to Trey's Theory Corner!
What's up, Gear Mortals? Trey Xavier here, and on today's episode of Trey's Theory Corner, we're going to talk about creating melodies by connecting chord tones. Now, there are music theory books galore, and in academia, you can find just shelves and shelves of books about music theory, ranging from super basic to incredibly complex. But it is very, very, very rare for people to talk about creating melodies. The melody needs to tell the story, and the way that you go about that is a very personal thing. But there are some guidelines. So people ask me about this a lot. Trey, I've got a riff or I've got a chord progression. How do I make a melody that fits with this chord progression? Or the reverse, which is I have this melody, what chords do I put behind it to reinforce the melody? Now, in the last couple episodes, we've been talking about chords and chord progressions. And now that we have like a little bit better grasp of what's going on inside of those chords, then we can take that information and apply it to the melody as well. The key word for this stuff is going to be relative. Now, all that means is that when we're talking about a melody note, the melody note is always defined in relation to the root of the chord that it's being played over. So for instance, if we go back to our trusty key of C major, and we play the chord C, and the melody note is an E, La. So because the note E is the third of the chord C major, we would say you're singing the third of C. La, la. So here's a very important relationship between the melody and chords. Melodies tend to be very linear. So there's not usually, especially if you're singing, giant leaps between the notes. This can be totally wrong. There's lots of melodies that are all over the place. But as a strong tendency, melodies tend to move in smaller intervals, whereas chords jump around a lot. So one easy way to make a melody is to have it move in scalar steps, right? Just from one note to the next note in a scale, and making sure to aim for chord tones that relate to the chords that are in the chord progression, okay? So I'm going to use a simple 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of C, which is going to be C, G, A minor, F. Okay? So let's start on the third. That's usually a great starting point, okay? The third helps to define the chord. It's less boring than singing the root. If you sing the root or play the root on the melody instrument, it's just a little bland sounding. The fifth is also a little bit bland. It's more bland than the third, but more exciting sounding than the root. So we're going to start on the third, which in this case, over a C major, is this E note. Okay, so La. So then we're going to G. What are the notes of G? Root, third, fifth. G, B, D. So we were on an E. D is really close to E, right? They're right next to each other. So we go La, La. There's our first two melody notes. We'll probably, if you're playing it on guitar, it would most likely be up here rather than so. La, la. So that's nice and easy to sing, and even though the chord just jumped down a fourth, we're only singing down a whole step. Okay, next chord is going to be A minor. So root, minor third, fifth. That's A, C, E. So we went E, D. Now the next closest note that's a chord tone for A minor is going, we could either go back up to E or we could go down to C. Those are both chord tones in A minor. So let's see what that sounds like. So if we go la, that sounds nice. Now let's try singing down to C. Really, either one of those works. I'm just going to arbitrarily choose going back up to E. Okay, so if we go, now we're going down to F is the next chord, right? So F consists of F, A, and C. So la da da. Now, because I decided to go up, we're kind of far away from either of those. A is down a fifth, C is down a third. We could go up to F, which is the root. Like I said, it's a little bit boring, but because it'll give us a really nice, smooth melodic motion, let's go to F and see what happens. La, da, da, da. Still sounds good. The construction of a melody, the overarching movement of it sometimes is more important than hitting specific target chord tones. Now, of course, this is a grand oversimplification of the whole thing. This is a super boring melody that has one note per chord change. It's pretty unlikely that you would do that. But this is how we're always going to be thinking about it while we're making this melody. What is the note in relation to the chord that's being played? So now if we slow down the chord progression a little bit and we give each chord a little bit longer so that we can spend a little more time on it and play a couple more notes, then we're left with a couple more options. So generally, like I said, very general guideline is you want to sort of land on the chord tone as your target note on the downbeat of the measure, okay? Right on the one, as the chord hits, you want to be hitting a chord tone. Because if you're hitting something that isn't a chord tone, it can either be a really beautiful, flavorful, cool, crunchy note, or it can be a disaster. Now, chord tones are guaranteed A+, great sound, no worries. You can totally get adventurous and play non-chord tones on the downbeat. I do it all the time, but you have to know what you're doing first. These are going to be guaranteed, juicy, awesome notes for you. What you do in between, you can get away with way more. You can get away with all kinds of gnarly notes in a melody in between the downbeat and the downbeat of the next chord when it comes back around, especially if the notes go by kind of quickly. So since we had one note per chord before, all I'm going to do is stretch out the melody. So I'm going to stick notes in between each of those, but each of those notes is still going to be the one that starts right on the downbeat when I hit the next chord. So when I hit that C, we're still going to be playing E. Over the G, it's still going to be D. A minor is going to be E again. And then when we get to F, back to F. But there's going to be a bunch of notes in between those. All right, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of flair. So here's going to be the first bar of the melody. So that fits pretty well. So we still only went from here to here, just stuck some cool stuff in between. So our first bar is, second bar I'm going to make, so I'm still landing back on that E when we get to the A minor. So that still lands us right on that E when we hit the A minor. So we haven't really changed a whole lot except that we're just adding a bunch of, I don't want to call it fluff because really it's making the melody a lot more interesting than our original idea. But it's sort of like filler. So far with each of those chords, we've landed on the third of C, then the fifth of G, and then the fifth again of A minor. And now we're going to land on the root of F, which of course is F. So now I'm going to have the last bar of melody go like this. Na, 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 na. So then what we're left with is na, 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 na. So it's a little boring, but that's a respectable melody. And all we really did to achieve this was hit chord tones as the chords were going by. And then in between those chord tones, we used scale notes from the key of C to fill out the melody. You don't always have to use just scale notes. You can use what are called chromatic notes, which are all of the other notes that exist. So there's a lot of different ways to use chromatic notes, but here's a real simple one, taking two chord tones that are a whole step apart and just connecting them with a half step in between, or normally if you played that note, that chromatic note in the middle, just anywhere in the key, it would sound really bad. But if you just use it as a little bridge to get from one note to the next, it just gives you a little bit of flavor and one extra beat that you can use. So as you're out there writing your melodies, these are the kinds of things that you're gonna have to keep in mind. Now, it's possible that you already do these things intuitively. I know that I do, but if you have a melody note and it doesn't really fit, you might use this kind of thinking to figure out why. For instance, if you play a major 7th chord and you're playing the melody note of a 4th, so in this case a melody note of an F, la, over C major 7, la, it sounds really bad. So that's just something to avoid. So long story short, when you're thinking about chords and melodies, you want to think about relativity, or the relative nature of the note against the chord. What are their relationship to each other? Is it a 3rd? Is it a 5th? Is it not a chord tone? Is it a 2nd? Is it a 4th or a 6th? Those are all notes that can work in the right situation. But if it's not working, it could be that maybe you just need to move it to a chord tone that fits. And worst case scenario, finding a spot to start your melody on, it's usually easiest just to start on a chord tone, maybe one that fits your voice the best, or is a really powerful one to sing, or maybe it's just sounds the best of the 3 or 4 chord tones that you have to work with. So now I want you to go forth in your songwriting and put this knowledge to work. Try it out for certain things. Maybe if you've had a chord progression sitting around that you didn't really know what to do with, if nothing else, this is just going to give you a little bit of kick in the pants, maybe generate some ideas that you can use to get to the next part of the song or whatever. Anyway, I hope you really learned something. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already so that the next time there's an episode of Trey's Theory Corner, you will get a notification, and I will see you then. First thing you got to think about when it comes to music theory. Number 1, what the fuck is it? What the fuck is music theory? If you already know the answer, please don't shout it out, because you'll look like a crazy person at home by yourself. But really, in order for you to understand what you even need it for or why you should care, you got to know what it is. And before we go any further, I have to define what I think of music theory as for you, so that we can take this journey together to improve our musical knowledge and understanding.